Hi again, friends, and welcome back to my channel. I love to have you back here. If you're new, I'm Stephanie. I make videos on the topic of language learning. In this video, what I want to discuss is how long it takes to learn a language. It's one of the most common questions out there, one of the thorniest ones as well. And I've been asked that on many platforms, how long I think it takes to learn a language in general, or how long it takes me in particular. I've gotten many similar questions, and in this video, I'm gonna tackle those questions. So first of all, one big thing to address before we even dive into how long it might take you to reach X level, it is what level you're talking about, because there's many different stages of learning a language. And when people ask that question in this generic way, how long does it take you to learn a language, it can be very difficult to answer because you don't really know what level they're talking about. And for some people, to say that they know a language is just simply to have this basic understanding and to be able to kind of get around when they travel. For others, it means to have this intermediate level and just kind of be able to talk about many topics, but not something complex. Or you might think, well, how long does it take to get fluent, right? That is also a valid question. And fluent, I think, well, what is fluent? That warrants a whole other video by itself. But let's just say, like, for the sake of simplicity, being fluent would be being able to speak on a variety of topics, use the language to express complex ideas, just be able to use it freely. And I think there's a level beyond fluent, and that is native-like. And to be native-like just involves so much more than that. It involves, knowing idiomatic language and expressions and being actually deeply familiar with the culture of the country or countries where the language is spoken. So I think being native-like just takes a whole other level of very, very deep knowledge of the language, and I honestly don't think that it can be done in a matter of months. I think that being native-like takes years, and it really, how many years, that depends on the language. But yeah, in general, how long it takes to learn a language, what do you mean? Do you mean to a basic level? Do you mean to a fluent level, etc.? Those things are obviously going to take different periods of time, of course. The higher the level, the longer it's going to take. So that is number one. But then also, some learning never stops. I am still learning some words in my native language every single day. Sometimes I'll hear somebody use a dialect word that I've never heard before or something like that. And so, we learn every day, even in our native languages, we learn every day. We read a new book, we see a word we've never seen used before. So some learning never stops. What about beyond that? What about if we think beyond the level where you want to take your target language? What else determines speed? Well, there are several very important factors at play, and one that is definitely not to be ignored is how closely related that language is to another language that you already speak. There's no way around it. Of course, languages that are very far removed from our native language or another one we've learned to a very high level are going to be tougher. That's a given. Learning related languages has its own challenges in terms of false friends and kind of confusing different grammatical structures because they're so similar. So you kind of tend to transfer from one language to the other, transfer your structures, which might be wrong in the other language you're learning. But, beyond those pitfalls, there's a lot of time that is saved when you learn a similar language, especially in vocabulary. Or perhaps you already learned the subjunctive in Italian, and so it's really easy to transfer that to French. Or, for example, you already learned to make certain difficult sounds in one language and then you encounter them in another, and it's no longer a learning curve to make your mouth muscles move that way. So it's very helpful when you've kind of had that exposure before to a similar language, be it your native one or not. And of course, it saves a lot of time, and of course, you're going to be able to learn such languages much, much more quickly. Another thing that is very important is how much experience you have with language learning, and that is not to be underestimated. Even if you learn a language that has nothing to do with your own, it's still going to be much easier if you already have a lot of experience with language learning. So it influences you in two big ways. One is that it influences you from a psychological point of view. And psychology is very important in learning. There's been extensive research on the topic. Of course, how we feel about learning really helps influence the outcome, and it speeds up or slows down learning. And so when you've learned other languages before, you have the confidence you can do it, you can do it, and so that kind of puts you in this better mood as opposed to somebody that has all of those doubts and they don't know if they can do it. And another thing, that number two, that is super helpful when you have a lot of experience with learning other languages, is that you kind of pick up the way language works, a little bit of like this approach to learning languages and this ability to know how to learn, but also just you're getting used to it. It gets easier and easier with every subsequent language, even if they have nothing to do with other languages. You have no advantage with script, for example, with vocabulary, with grammar, nothing. It's a totally different language. Still, if you've learned others, your brain is accustomed a little bit to noticing patterns, to paying attention to important structures. Your brain just kind of has this filter that is able to figure out the important information and is kind of able to speed up learning that way. And it is wonderful how that happens. And I don't know how it happens, to be honest, but it's true. And every polyglot I've ever talked to does say that there is a lot to be said about each subsequent language kind of becoming easier. And it does become easier. But sometimes you learn something that's super difficult. Learning it as your 10th language and learning it as your second language are going to be two wildly different experiences. Factor number 4 is the time that you dedicate to language learning. Of course, that's a no-brainer. The more time you dedicate, the quicker it's going to be. And that's just the way it is. Unfortunately, I don't think I learn languages very quickly these days. The reason being is there's so many factors that speed up my language learning, for example, but just because I'm so busy, I kind of have very little time for it. And that might be your case as well. And you're like, why am I not learning this as quickly as somebody else? Well, you don't know the situation of that somebody else. There's many people that have so much time to dedicate to language learning. It could be that your friend is majoring in Slavic literature in college and they have all the time in the world to learn a language. Or, for example, I saw this video on YouTube once about like an 8-hour per day language learning routine. I've never done that. I've never had time to do that. But if you find yourself that you have the time and the desire to do something that extreme, of course you're going to learn more quickly. And of course, I think that not having enough time is always an excuse because everybody has a little time, but having a little time or a lot of time dedicated to language learning is going to matter. And which leads me to the next factor is continuous versus broken learning. And I think it depends. Some people do this, some people don't. I do it, unfortunately. I know it's not the best when you kind of do this broken learning. What do I mean by that? I mean, you kind of pick up a language and then you drop it and then you go back to it. Now, I will always do that once I have a language core, because if I drop the language before I form what I call a language core, kind of having that core of expressions and just basic structures and just like the basics, maybe the A1, A2 level of the language on the European framework. If you drop it before you've been able to form that and talk about simple topics, chances are it's gonna disappear immediately. Even if you naturally retain languages, it's just gonna disappear. But when you're at some level and if you're not prone to forgetting languages, you can afford to drop them and go back and learn them again and then go back and learn another and all of that stuff. I do that. It's not the best thing, but it's what keeps me interested. I love variety and it is what it is. And if you're like me, then of course that's going to affect the speed with which you learn a language, because I cannot tell you how many times I've had situations in which I just have this thing where I kind of drop a language and then I go back to it, etc. So an example of that for me would be German, because I studied it for years in school and then I dropped it for several years and then I get back to it. So that really influences the total time. You can say that I've been studying it for 15 years probably, but at the end of the day it's not 15 full years. Oh wait, 17? I don't actually know, can't remember. But the point is, it's not 17 full years. When you think about like the chunks of time that I was studying it, it wasn't as continuous as some of the more recent languages I've studied, that I studied like in an unbroken manner. So that's always gonna affect speed. And so when you, for example, say that you've studied something for many years, think about it. Have you really, or did you do a lot of this broken learning? Which, as I said, is not optimal, but if it keeps you motivated, as it does me, because I get motivated when I switch up languages, then, it means that when you think about how many years it's been since you first started learning a language to when you kind of wrap it up, it means it's going to be much longer. But it's something that you just have to accept. Another huge factor is passion and motivation. There is no language that we learn more quickly than the one we're really motivated to learn. Like we really need it, or we're really passionate about it, or ideally both. But I think when it comes to those things, passion is more important than really needing it. But in general, passion and motivation, those things are really, really important. And so learning a language that is super easy, objectively speaking, very close to your native one, etc., can be very difficult if you don't have the passion for it. And learning like a very complex language can be easy if you have the passion for it. Passion really influences difficulty levels and it influences speed. So the more passionate you are about a language, the quicker you're going to learn it. That's something that I've seen quite a lot of, like many people that I know that have tried to start to learn languages with zero passion just because it's spoken by 500 million people and that's why they want to learn it. And then it flops because they didn't really have the passion for it. And that influences success, but it also influences speed because even if they manage to learn it, it takes years, it's slow, it's arduous. So passion really affects speed in my experience. And of course, what you do really, really matters. That's another big factor. What do I mean by that? I mean, do you rely on a class to teach you the language, or do you take learning into your own hands? Because a lot of the times, class learning doesn't utilize the best methods. It doesn't tailor anything to you or your own interests. And many people have this story of learning a language for X number of years in school and never really being able to speak it, as opposed to people, who have actually kind of taken the time to research what works for them, what methods exist out there, what has been proven to work, and they apply those methods that they like and that are effective, and so they achieve results very quickly. So of course, the methods you use to learn a language, they influence speed. And sometimes there's a lot of stuff that can be good in language learning in general, and we all know that they're good. And then there's stuff it has barely ever worked for anybody. And I'm gonna pop up a video on the screen that's gonna talk about, the best method to learn a language and how you can create that for yourself. But at the end of the day, it's about methods. They are gonna influence speed. And if you find the right methods for you that work for you and that help you be really quick at language learning, you're gonna be a fast language learner. And last but not least, personal talent. Yeah, I said it. I know it's a bit controversial because I also talked about how you don't need a language gene to learn a language, of course, because the human ability, we can all do it, but there's something to be said about personal talent. And I know that people usually don't speak about this, but sometimes some of us are just naturally better at recognizing patterns, for example, and picking up languages. Others are much better at playing football or playing the piano. It's just really, we are all going to have our own inclinations, which isn't to mean that we can't all become polyglots, because everybody can. Or simply learn an additional foreign language, just one more, because not everybody has to be a polyglot, but you know what I mean. Everybody can learn another language, but at the end of the day, of course, we all have our natural predispositions, which doesn't mean that we should just give up because we're not naturally inclined to it. No, it just means you find the right methods and you apply those right methods to achieve results. Now, maybe if you were born with a little bit more of natural inclination for language learning and not for drawing, then maybe you could learn a language faster. Who cares? It doesn't really matter. That's not what it's about. It's not about how quickly you can learn and to compare yourself to somebody else. But I think there's something to be said, and we should not pretend like there's no influence from personal inclination. Of course, there is an influence from what you are naturally inclined to do, what natural talents you have. There's always going to be an influence when it comes to that. I am sure that there's many people that are able to learn to cook much more quickly than I am. That doesn't mean that I can never learn, that kind of thing. I've talked about this before. Again, I'm going to pop up the video on the screen, but at the end of the day, that is going to influence speed naturally. But it's not all about speed, right? So we can all learn. So what does it matter? Some of us learn a little bit faster, others a little bit more slowly. So I'm going to give some examples from my own language learning to really illustrate these points, because also people are sometimes interested how quickly I learn a certain language, but also I think to really illustrate how the different influences can factor in this case. So let's take German, for example. I touched upon this earlier in the video, how it's a language for which I can't say I'm the most passionate about, and how it's also one that for the first few years of learning German, I was using especially inefficient methods. I was simply relying on school and doing no learning on my own. And so, of course, so many years counting, I think it's 17 or something, I'm still not fluent in German, because of course, when you dump it for years and pick it back up, and or when you had several years of school instruction which were ineffective, it takes forever. To give you a contrast example, the fastest I ever learned a language, I think it's around 3 or 4 months, because it's something that I never really time. I'm not good with timing, I'm not good with keeping track, because I just don't like it. But I think it was somewhere around 3 or 4 months, and that's Portuguese. Which isn't to say that Portuguese is the easiest language I ever learned. There's just many things that kind of came together at that time. So I was using the right methods. I knew at this point of my life, I knew all about how to learn a language, and so I did all the right things. Second, I already spoke Spanish, so there you go, being fluent in a related language. Another factor, I was only doing super enjoyable things. I was motivated also. I had this passion for Portuguese, because at the time I just kind of got this passion for the language and really wanted to learn it. So it was right timing when I was feeling passionate about it, and I was doing a little bit every day. I was consistent with it, so my learning was very continuous. It was not broken, like dump it, pick it back up, dump it, pick it back up. And it was already a period of my life in which I had experience with language learning, and as I said, the more languages you know, the better when it comes to speed. So there were so many things that came together, and that's the fastest, and it was to fluency actually. I'm not native like in Portuguese, I consider myself simply fluent, but there you go, the difference that it can be depending on how serious you are about it, what methods you use, how much experience you have. Because back when I started studying German, I had no experience. It was my second foreign language. I only learned English before that. I hadn't started learning languages by myself back then, so I still didn't know about all these methods and techniques that I figured out later through trial and error. And so it's this huge contrast between these two languages, and how factors such as experience, passion, how closely related they are to languages I already spoke, etc., can really influence things. Yeah, I just want to give that as an example, just so you can see that there's so many factors and you don't know how they're going to interplay when they come together. So there's no one straight answer to the question, how long is it going to take me to become fluent in language X? Because it depends on many things, and how these things interplay is something that's really difficult to say. I don't know if there's going to be a language that's going to take me longer than German, maybe one day, or I don't know if there's going to be a language that I'm going to be able to pick up faster than Portuguese one day. I kind of doubt it, because 3 to 4 months is already really fast. I doubt I can do faster than that, but for me it's not about speed. And I don't think for you that it should be about speed as well, because that diminishes enjoyment, and diminished enjoyment means slower learning. Ironically, I never thought about how quickly I'm going to learn Portuguese. I just enjoyed the process. So my advice to you is, don't think about speed, just trust the process and trust that eventually it's going to happen. The fastest way to learn a language in general, ignore all of the factors, because you have no control over them. They can influence you, and passion fluctuates, and what language you feel like learning, and whether you drop it because of life circumstances and come back to it or not. So many things don't depend on you. And also, you shouldn't pick languages based on the speed with which you learn them. So let's just put all of that to the side. The fastest way, regardless of all of the factors, is to simply not think about speed, because that way you're going to be able to enjoy the learning, and that speeds up no matter how difficult the language is. If you don't think about time and you simply trust that what you're doing will eventually work, and you enjoy the process, it's going to happen much more quickly. And that's how it happens when we learn a language really quickly, and we're surprised how quickly we learn it. It's because a lot of things aligned, but it's also because we didn't necessarily care about time. So thank you so much for watching this video to the end. Please let me know in the comments what you think about speed. Give me some examples. How has speed differed for you? What was like a language that you learned really slowly, or one that you learned really quickly? What do you think personally for you affects your speed? I'm very interested to know that. Perhaps I missed some factors that are very important. I would love to learn more. Please like and subscribe if you want to support me. It makes a huge difference for my channel. So thank you for supporting me continuously. You can expect a new video from me next Wednesday. And hint, the next 2 videos are going to be 2 very exciting collaborations. I am so excited about those. So yeah, I mean, I can't wait for you to see them. Let me know in the comments if you have any guesses who they might be with. And I will see you here next Wednesday. Bye for now.